can watch this video and look at these Google Docs as an example of what cool stuff looks like. And also, you'll notice that on here, especially Lexington and Concord paper paragraphs, you get a bunch of great examples. A lot of you sent me emails over the last couple of days asking about, like, how do I put evidence in this thing? Or is this thesis statement sounding good? Are these topic sentences in great shape? And you can use these as templates. You certainly can't just copy paste them, but you can use these as templates to see examples of what stuff looks like. So on the top, we'll go through these errors that are popping up in these paragraphs and how to fix them. And then when we get to the bottom, you'll see we have something that's pretty good. And this can seem pretty daunting because that's a lot of writing. But once you kind of get how this whole thing works together, topic, sentence, context, evidence, analysis, this should not be outside your wheelhouse. So let's start by looking at AP Lang CIS thesis statements and topic sentences. So I want you to have this up. Thesis statement, topic, sentence document. Geez, please. Additionally, I want you to have your own thesis statements and topic sentence up so you can make any quick revisions as needed. So, for your thesis statement, you need to make sure that when you're writing your thesis statement that you mention one side or the other as likely or probably shot first. If you're saying that one side definitely shot first, or if you're saying that one thing is definitely true when it comes to the AP Lang paper prompt, you are not being true to what's going on. As a historian, or just as like a human being, it's a very rare moment where there's a definitive. So it's likely or it's probably. Based on that evidence, you can only make an educated guess, and your thesis needs to reflect that. Also, you need to directly state something about which argument you will be making in your thesis. Okay, so that means you can't just allude to a guy who said something. You need to mention something about bias, believability, or testimony. That has to be in your thesis. If you're doing the CIS jam, if you're doing the AP Lang jam, you have to mention a specific reason or reasons about whatever the paper is asking about the criminal justice system. And you can't just say broadly good or bad. You have to mention specifics. AP Lang or CIS, you can't just say it's likely that the British shot first because of reason 1, 2, 3. You have to mention bias, believability, or testimony. Take 2 minutes, look at your thesis statements, make sure that you are not speaking in definitive. You're not saying that it's absolutely true that somebody shot first. You're using a word like likely or probably, and make sure you have specific thing in there. You have bias, or you have something related to memory as it relates to the justice system. If you have questions, raise your hand. You got 1 minute to make any corrections. Ready, set, go. What's your last name? Make it more likely to come. Just change that phrasing at the end of that. Yeah. Once this bad boy clicks over to 820, it will get fired up again. Likely, probably, it is more probable that. All right, so I want you to tell me about these. If this is my thesis statement. The British troops are the group that shot first at Lexington Green for several reasons. A British witness swore that it was his own men that fired first. A colonial onlooker gave his memorable testimony only days after the incident, and there are multiple peoples with similar versions of what actually happened on that day. What is the first problem that manifests itself in that thesis statement? Not a problem. What is the first thing they do wrong? Ms. McDonald.
They say that this was what happened.
This was what happened. What do they need to do instead?
This is likely.
It is. So the British troops are likely the group that shot first. It is probable that the British. What do you think about the reasons below? Are these good or bad, and why? A British witness swore that it was his own man that fired first. What sort of topic do they need to mention in here?
Like that, the bias.
Yeah, there's a lack of bias when he's saying the British shot first. A colonial onlooker gave his memorable testimony only days after the incident. How's that one? Does it work or not? No, it does. This would be fun. You don't need to specifically say time. I mean, this is beating us over the head with time. Memorable testimony only days after the incident. I mean, so there's enough time language in that reason for it to be good to go. I mean, we're not robots when we're writing. And there are multiple peoples. I mean, that should say what? Yeah. Multiple people with similar versions of what actually happened on that day. How does that one rate?
I guess it's okay
Why?
because it alludes to the alignment of testimony.
Yeah. So this is fine too. And you would expect that when this goes to topic sentence land, that this multiple people's business gets turned into what? It becomes more specific. So it's okay to kind of speak in generalities up here, and then in your topic sentence shift to specifics.
So for our thesis statement, for the CIS thing, do we have to state something like a colonial onlooker, or can we just mention the topic?
Are you trying to say, like, can you say that the British are likely to have shot first because of bias blank and blank?
Yeah.
No. You'd want to become that would be too general, and you wouldn't necessarily be setting yourself up for great success in your topic sentences.
So do I have to mention?
You don't. There's a pendulum, right?
Mm-hmm.
On one end of the pendulum is saying, like, the British shot first because bias. On the other end of the pendulum, it's hyper specific. The British shot first because Colonel A was captive and he said, blah, and you spell it out way too much. You want to try to fall somewhere in that sweet spot in the middle. Okay. Does anybody else have questions about how you infuse things like bias? What are other things, multiple testimonies, or something else in your thesis statement? Okay, take 2 minutes right now. So it's 8:31 and 8:33. We're coming back. Examine your thesis statements and make sure that you're doing a good job of not being like this and including business like what's going on. Oh, holy moly, what's going on down yonder. Raise your hand if you have questions. I'll float around and help. Race to go.
So that's just what I was asking about. Just
Remember when I was talking about your personality?
mm-hmm.
If you want to just be more plainly stated right here. Okay, so just kind of, I would suggest going back to the drawing board and just try to make something that to you sounds dumb,
Okay.
but might have, and dumb and overly obvious, but might actually kind of serve as a better foundation.
Yeah, but they're just like.
This one. I don't have the one like specific business because I don't hear it.
Oh, and then this is a placeholder. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. We're using words like. Yeah, the same thing holds true for the AP Lang paper. You don't want to be so specific that you are just mentioning evidence that's going to appear later, but you have to be mentioning reasons to support whatever it is you're claiming in your thesis statement. All right, now let's talk about taking thesis statements to topic sentences before we jump into paragraphs for a moment. Now, this is my first topic sentence. Based on my thesis statement, my first topic sentence needs to be about what? A British witness swore that his men fired first. Now, we know that this thesis statement needs to make a revision to include what argument? There, specifically, what about bias? There is a lack of bias if there is a British officer saying that it was the British who shot first. Okay. Now, the difference again between a topic sentence and a thesis statement is that a topic sentence is more. Okay, so in my topic sentence, I want to be mentioning a specific British soldier or a specific circumstance, and I need to use like what big word or a synonym for what big word. Starts with a B. Bias. Okay, so we need to slap our reader across the face with that stuff. Tell me what you think. John Bateman, a British regular, swore that it was his very own soldiers that were the ones who to fire first at the Battle of Lexington Green. Good or bad topic sentence? It's good, bad, or iffy.
Is there so what in it though? Like, why does it matter that he said his own?
There's no so what, because what kind of big word or phrase are they missing? Bias. Because now someone could plausibly make the claim that when he says, or when this person writes, swore that it was his very own soldier that, you are alluding to bias, and you are certainly right. But your topic sentence wants to slap your reader across the face with the argument you're intending to make. So because there's not a word like bias, we don't really have a so what, and this topic sentence would not be acceptable. If you scroll over to the side, you can kind of see a bit of a revision of what the topic sentence could look like. A seemingly biased British soldier, John Bateman, testified that it was, in fact, the British who shot first. Or you could say a soldier that would seemingly be biased towards the British interests, John Bateman, testified that it was, in fact, the British that shot first. Do you see what I did there? I included a word like bias. I made it apparent that this paragraph is going to be about this British soldier who would seem like he's biased. That would be my context. My evidence would be what he actually said, and my analysis would be explaining and re-emphasizing why and how this guy, who you would expect to be go British, is saying that the British shot first, and so therefore it is more likely that the British shot first. Make sense? It'd take 2 minutes, so at 8:38 we're coming back. Just look at your topic sentences and make any notes to yourself that you need to revise. Notes can be something like including a specific argument. Notes can be something like making sure that you transition. Just make sure your topic sentences are in good standing based on what we just talked about. Ready, set, go. So we got 1 minute. Whatever the next thing is in your thesis statement. And you also need to make sure that when you go to your next one, you transition. So you might want to make that note if you don't see any transitions. Yes. Yep. So you're doing a good job of mentioning bias and time. You need to bring in, a specific, make it more specific. All right. Let's move on to some examples of actual paragraphs. So make sure you're looking at the document that says Lexington and Concord paper paragraph. So we're going to cruise through these bad boys, talk about what's going on in a good way and a bad way, and hopefully you can apply some lessons to your own. Again, also AP Lang paper people, the same lessons here relate to exactly what you're writing. So let's look at the topic sentence. A young British officer, Lieutenant John Baker, confirms the theory that the colonial troops were the first to fire at Lexington Green on the morning of April 19th. Now, is that topic sentence specific? Yeah, yep. It's going to tells us exactly what we're going to be talking about in this paragraph. What is this topic sentence missing? Say it louder. Bias, the argument that they plan on making. This is just a statement of fact. You'd want to include a word like bias or a phrase that means bias to make it clear that you're going to be talking about bias. Also, there's one other thing that should be shooting off alarm bells to you as bad about this topic sentence. It's speaking in definitive terms, right? They're saying confirms the theory that. Remember, you're not confirming a theory. You have a theory, and you're exploring why that theory is most likely or most probable. You know, so just a couple of things. So let's see if they rebound. Now, after the topic sentence comes what? Context, right? Background information. What would be good background information if this is my topic sentence? Yeah, who is this guy? What's going on here? His essential argument claims that he was among the party of the British troops on their march to Concord. When they reached Lexington, they discovered a group of a few hundred rebels who immediately began firing at his men without reason. In response, he claims his men began firing to disperse the rebels. Great context, providing a bunch of background information about what's going on with this guy and what the mechanics were of that day. So they're summarizing the lead up to the moment. So really good. Baker writes in his diary that he and his men advanced, remaining, quote, prepared against an attack, though without intending to attack them, but on our coming near them, they fired one or two shots upon our men without any orders, rushed upon them, fired, and put them to flight. Great quote to choose, because this is where this guy is writing exactly in his testimony about who shot first. They didn't pick a quote around the good quote. They chose the best quote. Great work. Now, problem with this quote is that it uses a lot of words like our and us and them. Why is that a problem?
You don't always know who's the us and who's the
Right. You know, we have no kind of like frame of reference. So it would be really smart for this person right after the quote to summarize the quote in their own words, is emphasizing who is firing at who. So pretty much kind of like essentially taking out the ours and us's and making it more specific. In other words, holy moly, crushed it. And nice intro phrase too, to indicate that a summary of the quote is going to happen. Baker argues that colonial troops fired at the British first without any provocation of any kind on the British part. Thus, the British troops began to fire back to disperse the large party. This is great. Okay, this is a great beginning of analysis, kind of taking that quote and putting it into their own phrasing and words. Now, what do I have to do after we kind of bring up that quote? I need to explain why and how my evidence supports my topic sentence. In this case, I'm explaining why and how this proves what?
The colonists shot first.
That the British shot first. I have to explain how this quote supports the idea that this guy is speaking without bias, and because he doesn't have bias, his testimony is more likely to be true. Does that make sense? Okay, now because this person doesn't put the word bias or the idea of bias in their topic sentence, you'll see them struggle with their analysis. Baker's observations are more credible than other accounts despite not being under oath, seeing as his account was written immediately after the event without any heat of the moment pressures. What is terrible about that? And this paragraph had a slight problem, but a big problem with the topic sentence. Everything else is great up until this moment, and this last moment is awful. And it's important that you understand why it is awful.
Because he says that Baker's observations are more credible than other accounts.
No. What, Brody?
It says it was written immediately after, so when did you have even moment?
So that is a logical fallacy, absolutely. It doesn't relate back to the topic sentence. This paragraph is supposed to be about what again? Bias and lack of bias. What do they move the conversation to at the end? Time, right? Under the moment pressures. We're bringing up completely different ideas. So this paragraph is it has an error at the topic sentence. It's moving along in a nice way, and then it just takes a dump, okay, and takes a weird zag and goes off into a way that would make this paragraph bad. So this is what you need to be wary of when you are constructing your own paragraphs. You need to be wary of precisely what is the argument you intend on making that's presented in your topic sentence. And you need to make sure that everything in that paragraph is focused on building that argument. Make sense? Let's look at another one. Tell me how it's going. John Bateman, a British regular. This just for your reference too. These are all paragraphs that were written by students last year. John Bateman, John Bateman, a British regular at the scene of the battle, lacked bias when he swore that it was his own soldiers who were the ones who to fire first at the Battle of Lexington Green. What do we think about this topic sentence? Everyone give it a thumbs up, thumbs middle, thumbs down. Actually, you can't give it a thumbs middle. It's either good or it's bad. But hold up a thumb. I mean, this is a no-stakes situation here. You're just going to be right or wrong. Okay. All right. This is a fine topic sentence. Okay, it's specific, mentions a specific guy, lacked bias, and then it talked about how this guy lacked bias. Good topic sentence. Due to his status as a British soldier, one would assume that he was loyal to the British cause. Is that good context? Why is that good context? Yeah, it's giving us relevant background information about this guy's bias. Understanding that he should be so dependable, one could conclude that it would be a rational decision for him to say that the colonists shot first. Again, is this good context? Background information about this guy and kind of like setting up the fact that he should be biased towards the British side. However, nice transitional word or phrase, he went against his own self-interest and said, I testify, declare that I heard the word of command given to the troops to fire, and some of the said troops did fire. Is that a good quote to choose? Larkowski. Take a guess.
No.
Why not?
I don't know. I said some. I
Good.
didn't specify which.
Well, now that's what the quote said that they took this from. A good quote is going to say something about who fired first. Does this quote say something about who fired first? Yes, it does. Now, you smartly noted, Ms. Larkowski, that this quote is lacking specifics. It says, our troops, I heard a commander. So what would this person need to do right after giving us this vague, appropriate quote? What? Summarize it specifically in their own words. Okay? This is a British soldier saying that he actually heard one of his own men command to fire and then heard gunshots. Okay, good. This testimony was given showing no bias towards the British at all and makes Bateman's claim more believable than if he were to say the colonists had shot first. He is actively speaking out against his own identity, and that would be extremely difficult, but he did it to stay truthful. So again, they're smacking us over the face at the end, okay, with analysis, explaining how and why this quote supports the idea that this is a guy who lacks bias, and he is confirming that the British are likely to have shot first. Make sense? Okay, so we're not going to get to this last one. We only have 2 minutes. This last one talks about how to incorporate rebuttal into your paragraph. So if you are struggling with that, I would suggest you maybe read that and try to fold that in there if you want. Otherwise, we'll get to this next week and then talk about some AP Lang specific things that relate still to the CIS paper. By the end of the day today, I want you to make any revisions that you can or want to make, but everybody, and hear me, everybody, so we should be talking about 86 for 86, need to submit what you have written so far. It's an ungraded thing, just so that I can see where you guys are at and I can start to group you appropriately as we continue to work on our paper drafting process. Make sense? Not graded, but submit. So you have 1 minute to do it right now, or if you know you have some flex time, make some changes and then do it later. What? 59? Well, great. You have 9 minutes to do it then. Thanks, Cheyenne. And this is also going to be a wonderful opportunity for you to ask me some questions specifically about what you got humming in your Chromebooks right now.
So,
You have to pull a quote.
okay.
Yep, 100% your pull quotes. That's fine. Yeah, good. And what, based on this thesis, what's your first topic? Yeah, you need to make sure that when you're writing your intro, or sorry, when you're writing your introduction paragraph, that what happened right before your thesis is about this. No, don't make it too confusing. When you're writing your intro, you want to have something right before your thesis about why it seems like the column is being shot. Yeah, in your intro. Yeah.
Do I want to mention more what person
So in this one, no, because you're going to have multiple accounts. And that would be
No.
No. I would say, double check it with Potter, but I would say no. That's fine, yeah. Because you need to make sure though that when you get into your quote, that you are becoming more specific, but it doesn't need to say that.
Yes, but do you have? Oh, okay.
On my belt.
Did this help?
Dude, Trey's
Yeah.
using my practice man's belt.
So you,
For his
when you
belt.
sent us, I don't remember if they used that. I just didn't use that, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're like,
No.
do a copy this or whatever.
Right, no, you can 100, and your paragraph will likely sound similar too. That's fine.
Yeah, word for wait,
My
so
brother
what
was
sort
a
of,
Trump.
like, codes should I get this one still, because like I don't know.
Yeah, my mom,
how to
my
think
mom
of
thinks he's a
pulling it
Republican
versus
just because he's in
one
the military. I almost wanted to punch him.
You might want to just do some additional outside research and bring in about sworn testimony. Maybe bring in, yeah, you can't do outside research in the sense of find more information about who shot first, but you can bring in other things that provide more insight about sworn testimony. You'll see the last paragraph when you read it discusses memory.
We can use those.
Yeah.
there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any questions?
I mean, that's okay.
He's
She's in new pants before this year.
Any questions over here?
Less work for you later.
No. No? Super duper. Any questions over here? No? No? How we feel about the paragraphs? Well, you should know, because you know what good ones sound like now. Good questions over here? Yeah. Yeah, you don't. We gotta move kind of like the bar for topics and just kind of understanding when it has the parts that it needs to enter. What we got? Is this a body paragraph?
It seems a little.
And then this thing will be a body paragraph.
Yeah, I know. It's only one extra paragraph.
See, but I was gonna do my recos.
Get rid of phrases like I understand, I think. You're writing about this from kind of like a third person. Instead of saying, I understand. Just say sports facilities make it so weird. Yeah, and again, it's the body paragraph. Yeah, I think it's introduction. You want to make sure that we're used to.
Will used to get a cell phone.
When Jack would go out.
And then that was my concern about this. It has, this is a nice little roadmap. We'll talk about it later next week. But you want to make sure that you have thesis in there because that thesis you can use as like a.
I don't know the difference from the kickoff
Exactly.
this year.
We wanted new people.
They're all much faster. This is the problem. Roy was on.
And do you have any questions?
Bailey.
You have a what? Okay.
Bailey.
Well, you got
3 topics in
a whole day to make magic happen. What'd you say?
I said I only have the thesis and 3 topics.
I'll try to crank out as much of a paragraph as you can by the end of the day.